Peter.
Okay. Okay, good morning. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to my talk. Today, I'm going to talk about implementing valid and reliable online assessment. So we'll begin by looking at an outline of what I'm going to talk about over the next 20 to 25 minutes. Firstly, we'll look at the issue and we'll look at what validity and reliability is. And then we'll look at how we can mitigate or minimize cheating through the choice of assessment task types, through the choice of testing topics. And finally, we'll look at how we can minimize cheating in online exams. And then we'll wrap up with a conclusion. So let's begin with the issue. Cheating is not a new issue. As long as there's been tests, there's been students trying to cheat on the test. People have been writing on the hands, giving each other answers, throwing each other pieces of paper for a long time. Even when we proctored exams face-to-face, students hacked into our online test system and got the test and were able to download the test before the exam and share it with each other. During a test, students easily communicated with each other during the exam and were able to give each other answers, signals each other the answers, etc. When we proctored exams face-to-face, students were able to access the internet and use external devices such as mobile phones, even though we were standing in front of them watching them closely. Students also were able to access documents on their computer and go to different apps. In extreme cases, students got someone else to take their exam for them while they were actually sitting at this computer screen. So somebody was doing their exam for them remotely. And unfortunately, that was becoming increasingly common. And I actually seen that happen a few times. It's really hard to tell when a student is sitting there and they're not actually taking the exam themselves, someone else is doing it. It's very, very hard to tell. For assignments or long-term projects, often students use professional agencies to do the assignments for them. And there are a lot of businesses that exist, and the students tell these agencies what kind of assignment they want, how long they want it, and the agency will write it for them. And increasingly, the agencies got really good at doing this, and they'd have the appropriate number of mistakes to avoid suspicion. So if students were cheating when we were there proctoring, watching them, imagine what students are doing at home remotely when we're not there and we're not watching them. So the whole issue has been exacerbated with online learning. Opportunities for students to cheat, to copy, to plagiarize, to use impersonation to get someone else to do the test for them. All of that has been increased with this move to online assessment. So what I want to talk about in this talk is how can we design and implement assessment tasks that limit the ability of students to cheat and get outside help, and thus maintain an acceptable level of validity and reliability of our assessment. So what is validity? What is test validity? Circle the best answer. Is test validity A, testing what you teach? B, measuring constructs you intend to measure? C, making sure a reasonable sample of course content is tested? D, making inferences based on test results? Or E, all of the above? So the answer is, of course, E. It's all of the things above. Probably answer D is the best answer. It's making inferences based on test results, and it's using the information gained from test results to make important decisions, such as should students pass a course, should they move to the next level, should they enter a certain program, should they gain entry into a country. So validity is important. Reliability is a little bit different. Which word best describes test reliability? Is it A, fair, B, reasonable, C, dependable, D, consistent, or E, all of the above. So what do you think? So really the answer is D. Fairness and a test being reasonable are probably more related to validity. Dependability is certainly a part of reliability. You want your test to be dependable. But really the key thing about reliability is that you want it to be consistent. If the example that's often given to as an example of test reliability is if you give the test to a group of students one day and then you lose the test and you gave the same test to the same group of students the next day, they should get exactly the same scores as they did on the first day. So that's consistency, and that's the key thing about reliability. Okay, so what can we do to mitigate cheating when we're doing assessment? And this is the key part of the presentation, really. Now, objective assessment task types typically found on tests, such as multiple choice questions, true, false, matching, closed test, short answer questions. These are objective assessment task types where there is one answer and it's either right or wrong, and it's objective, and a computer can mark that right or wrong. There's no human evaluation in that. Those type of question tasks are very easy for students to cheat on because there's little communication. There's just the answer they have to give. So if the integrity of a test or an exam is compromised, validity and reliability are compromised. So the third point there on the slide, avoid tests and exams if possible, it is quite controversial. But you need to ask yourself, is it absolutely necessary to have a test or to have an exam? If it's going to be compromised in any way, if you're not 100% sure that the students are all taking the test themselves, that they're not somehow getting outside help, if this is an issue, then you need to ask yourself, is it actually worth having a test or an exam? Or are there other ways to have an assessment to make the whole assessment process more valid and more reliable? If you are required to have an exam, then make the exam open book, which means the opportunities if students cheat or copy or get outside. If students look up extra information on the internet or use their notes, it's not an issue because it's an open book test. Secondly, if you are going to have an exam, make sure that the weighting of the exam or the test is low. You don't want it to be more than 10% of the overall course grade. At the end of last semester, I had a colleague who made the final exam 5%. So the chances of students bothering to cheat, to somehow get someone else to do the test for them, or to do anything else, to do anything else that's not appropriate, it's kind of low because it's only worth 5%. However, if your final exam is worth 20%, the students are more likely to think about cheating. This last point is very important. To mitigate cheating through assessment task types, you need to choose assessment tasks that make cheating and getting outside help more difficult. So here's a list of the types of tasks that really limit the amount of cheating that students can do. These tasks require multiple drafts from students and feedback from the teacher. So if the student is writes, for example, an essay, if it's a process essay that the students do over maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and you see their plan, you see their first draft, you see the final draft, and you're giving feedback, it's really likely that the student's going to do it themselves. Same with projects and reports and research assignments, case studies. All of those things are done over time. The teacher can see them as the students develop them. They can see the plan. They can see the drafts, various drafts, and different sections of the assignment. Case studies, similarly, are another good way to mitigate cheating. Presentations are obviously a good thing to do because it's hard for a student to get someone else to do a presentation for them if they're the one giving the presentation. Scenario-based assessment with multiple tasks is another good way to mitigate cheating. Scenario-based testing, let me explain what that is. A scenario-based test is when you have a series of tests throughout a course based on the one scenario. So I'll give you an example. Last semester, I taught a course in technical writing. And the assessment for this course, the scenario set up at the beginning of the semester, was that the students worked for an IT company. And the IT company, the CEO, was worried about the security of within the company with mobile phones, with computer security. So there was a series of tasks revolving around the scenario that the students had to complete throughout the semester. So the first assessment task was that the students had to write a memo to the CEO of the company asking for clarification about what specifically they were worried, what the CEO was worried about, what parts of security was a concern for them, and that was an assessment. Then in another assessment based on the same scenario, the students had to write a report, and this was done in groups. And the students came up that they had to find three apps that were used to limit security on the computer, and they had to choose the best app, and they had to make a recommendation. So that report was done over a period of 3 weeks. And I saw the drafts of that, so I knew what they were doing. Very unlikely they're going to get any help from outside on that assignment. And there was a couple of other assessments that were related to that scenario as well. So a scenario-based assessment is a good thing to do. Personalized portfolios where the students have to write about their assessment, their experiences, what they learned is another good way to mitigate cheating. And the use of peer and group assessment. So a student might be tempted to cheat on their own, but if it's a peer assessment or a group assessment, they're less likely to do that because it means they're going to have to say, hey, what about we get some outside help with this assignment? And they're less likely to do that. So there are a number of ways that you can mitigate cheating through the choice of task type. Another thing is to personalize and localize topics through by making the test task related to the student. So, for example, a report on business for a business report could be something like reporting on the problems of parking in a parking lot on campus. An external person is not going to have information about that. They're going to find it very difficult to write that assignment. Another example is a nutrition assignment where the students track and evaluate their own weekly dietary intake. Pretty hard for someone else to do that. And then they have to evaluate that. Pretty hard to get someone else to do that. A technical writing assignment where students had to give instructions on how to download and use Respondus Monitor. That is the assessment software that we use at Zayed University. So you can also mitigate cheating through choice of the testing topic. Okay, lastly, if you have to use an exam, if you're kind of compelled by your university or your department to have an exam, to have a final exam, then there are a number of ways you can limit cheating in an online testing situation. And there's a bunch of online testing companies. The most popular being ProctorU, Respondus, and Proctoring. Now, these online testing companies often use remote proctors as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that. These online testing companies, when you have an online exam, they use a secure browser. And the secure browser does a number of things which limits the possibility of students to cheat. So, for example, it disables ports for external devices, so students can't plug in external things. It blocks internet browsing. It blocks the use of unauthorized software. It restricts navigation. It limits them to a few keys, a few things that they can use. It denies access to keyboard shortcuts like copy and paste. It disables screen capture, screen recording, screen sharing, and screen mirroring, and it disables the printer. So all of these things mean that the student can only access the exam that's on the screen at that time. What can you do before the exam to mitigate cheating? You can raise students' awareness of academic integrity. You can make students aware that cheating is academic misconduct and it's not an acceptable thing to do. They can sign some kind of academic integrity contract. Now, that's quite important, and that could mitigate a lot of the cheating before it even starts. Have different versions of the same exam, so A, B, C, different versions. Or even better, have a pool of test items which the computer randomly selects from. So every student gets a number of different questions. So, for example, in a business exam that I ran at the end of last semester, we had 3 sections of the exam, and for each section, there was 20 questions in the pool, and each student's got 5 questions randomly selected. So every student got a different test. Very difficult for students to cheat on that. They don't know which version their friends got. Set a timer for the exam so it's not unlimited amount of time, and set a timer for each question. Continued, set auto-submit. So make sure that the students submit after a certain amount of time. They don't, it's not up to them to submit. After an hour, it submits. Scramble the order of questions, scramble the order of distractors, A, B, C, D. Set the password and only give it to students 10 minutes before the exam. So these are things you can do before the exam. During the exam, I've mentioned already this live online proctoring, remote proctoring. There are 3 types. There's live online proctoring where the teacher sits there while the student's doing the exam and they can see all the students and they can sort of watch for suspicious behaviour. Kind of difficult if you've got more than 20 students. You can record everyone doing the exam and go back and watch it later. The best one is automated advanced proctoring. It's using artificial intelligence, and it records when any students do suspicious behaviour. So if they do this, or they're always doing this, or they do this, or someone walks in the room, or they disappear, you'll get a report at the end of the exam that will tell you there was suspicious behaviour, and it kind of tells you whether it was serious or minor, and you can go back and have a look at the student doing the exam. Sometimes they're just messing about trying to find their ID or something. Record students, their audio, their screen while they are taking an exam. Now, of course, there are a number of legal and privacy issues related to this whole remote recording of students doing an exam. Don't only allow students to take one question at a time. Don't allow them to backtrack, possibly change answers. Get students to write longer answers on a piece of paper, then photograph and upload that answer rather than writing on the computer. And after the exam, delay the score availability. Don't give the students their scores and their feedback on the exam straight after, because some students still might be doing the test. Limit the amount of feedback that is given. And this is counterintuitive to me, because I think assessment should be used to promote learning. But in this case, you want to limit the amount of feedback that is given on the actual online exam, because students will begin to find out what the answers are, and that will be published, and students will have access to that. And finally, check predicted scores for the achieved scores. If you've got students getting 90s and they're around, and you'd expect them to get sort of 60, maybe you need to look at that and see what was going on there. So finally, when implementing online assessment, you can't just give the same test with the same questions to all the students at the same time. You're asking for trouble if you do that. You can significantly mitigate and limit students' ability to engage in academic misconduct, to get outside help, to cheat, to get someone to do the exam for them, through the choice of assessment task type. I think that's the main way to mitigate it. And also through the choice of topic of the assessment. And if you have to do an online exam, there are a number of things which I just mentioned that you can do before, during, and after the exam to limit cheating. Okay, well, thank you very much. That's the end of my talk.
Thank you so much, Peter. Interesting and engaging. I've got here a question, Peter. Now, if you don't mind me to ask you about this, you had now a list of practical suggestions, let's say, about how to reduce any available opportunities for cheating, right?
Yeah.
To what extent do you think that these have been successful and have been used during the past period when we had to completely teach and do everything remotely? To what extent do you feel like these have been implemented in writing classes? Were these successful or not?
I mean, it's a good question, Wafa, and it's hard to say because, you know, we weren't there and it was the first cycle and we didn't have a lot of time to plan it. But I think we did pretty well. I think by using, I think, like I'm looking at the slide here, and you know, I think we did a lot of these things which would have limited cheating. And I also think using the secure browser it goes a long way. So by using responders, we mitigated cheating a lot in that way. And we did things before, during, and after the test. But what I found during what we did was when we were teaching our business course, we actually went back and said, okay, we're a little bit worried about the ability of students to cheat now that they're at home. Let's look at the assessment task types, and we actually changed that to mitigate cheating. And I think we made the students do a research report, which wasn't there before. We made them do presentations. All of those things made me feel much more comfortable that the work that the students was doing was their own. And I felt way more comfortable giving that the assessment was valid and reliable. Certainly more comfortable than during the exam. And I think we did our best. And I think there's only so much you can do. But I think, you know, the best way forward is to look at the task type and also the choice of topic. And we need to look at that a little bit more. The choice of topic to limit the cheating.
Right. And I felt, Peter, what was really helpful in making online assessment valid and reliable when we were doing everything online, it was the fact that, for me at least, I realized that there were things that I did when I was teaching the students face to face. So when it came to online assessment at the end, it was very much possible to ask the students, for example, to write their reflections about certain apps and certain things that we did in a class when we used to meet face to face. I'm wondering now if we assume that, let's suppose, I hope that we are getting back to normal teaching, hopefully, but let's assume that we are teaching online again. Now, do you think the same procedure, or if the same procedure is followed online, again, we can still consider the reflection toward the end of the teaching online period? It can also be like as successful as before. Let me clarify this a little bit. Okay. When the student was there face to face, we realized that it was the student who was attending everything. So at the end, it was that particular student who would be able to write the reflection, including what we did in the class when he physically was there. But now, since everything gonna happen online, how can you guarantee in the first place that whatever you do online would be attended by that student himself? By now, we know the cameras. Very often, many students and families reported that it was attacking their privacy, right? The cameras are not doing the job. And to be honest, the cameras themselves, very often,
it's 11 hours.
like if I know a person before, I can recognize him in the camera. But if you are going to see the student for the first time on the camera and then keep communicating through camera, where often you cannot even see him, what is going to happen next? How can you make sure that it was him, nobody else, who's attending all of this? And at the end, I'm worried like, okay, how can I ask or follow the same procedure again with the students? Did I put my idea across successfully, Peter?
That was a long question. with about 10 questions, Wafa. I think one point that came out there where you said, how can we guarantee something? There are no guarantees. I don't think we can guarantee anything. We can try and limit and make things as difficult as possible for students. To go back to one of your earlier questions, I think we learned a lot through online assessment, which we should implement when we go back and do assessment face-to-face. I think we still use the secure browser. We still need to think about the task types and personalizing the task to make it more difficult to cheat. This personalized portfolio in one of my courses worked really, really well because it became something that was worth 10%, and students had to make a reflection of pre-course, post-course, and they had to reflect on each of the assignments. And it really was interesting to find, and there was about 10 questions about each assignment, like, what did you learn from the assignment? Was it difficult working with a group? What would you do differently? And there's just no way that someone from an outside company can write that. Do you know what I mean? Because it's so personalized and the person wouldn't have a clue what to write about. So personalizing that portfolio, and it ended up being worth 10% of the grade, I think that's a great thing to do. You also mentioned this issue of privacy issues and legal issues with being recorded, and there are issues, but we seem to manage to get around those quite quickly and say, this is essential, and this is that for the exam purposes, you must be recorded. And I'm not sure if there was that much resistance. I'm not sure. I wasn't party to that discussion, but it seemed to be that most students just sort of seem to accept it and get on with it and do it, and treated us, Zayed University and the faculty, as professionals. And but there are legal and privacy issues there for sure. But I think we learned a lot from this process, and there's a lot of things that we learned through the online assessment that we should carry on and do when we're face-to-face, when we're back to normal, if that ever happens.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And also, you mentioned something very important. When you said that at the start, one of the successful tools is to tell the students why they should depend on themselves in doing the exam, right? And I believe it's not only increasing their awareness at the start of the exam, because honestly, when I talk to them at the start of the semester, just building this bridge with them, telling them particularly about how they should be self-independent in their exams, and even in taking the responsibility of being successful in this course. I feel like this sort of communication with the students really is really effective. So showing them that's on them, showing them that we are confident that that they were okay to just to get the benefits from the course, right?
Yeah.
So
I agree with you.
Yeah. Right. Thank you so much, Peter. Engaging. I like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yeah.